folks, my name is John Lay and welcome back to the channel. Okay, so it's no secret that over the past 4 years, the United States and South Korea alliance has seen better days. And
in South Korea, teachers are known as nation builders. Here in America, it's time we treated the people who educate our children with the same level of respect.
By the way, how bad were the Academy Awards this year? Did you see it? And the winner is a movie from South Korea. What the hell was that all about? We got enough problems with South Korea with trade. On top of it, they give him the best movie of the year. Was it good? I don't know.
there's plenty of blame to go around for everyone for this deteriorating relationship. But one of the reasons as to why this alliance has seen better days is that over the past 4 years, Donald Trump has treated military alliances as though it's some kind of a protection racket. And especially when it comes to South Korea and as well as Japan, the United States government has reflected Trump's desire for allies to pay more money into maintaining these alliances. Now, this video is not going to be about the burden sharing cost itself. This video is going to be talking about USFK, which stands for United States Forces in Korea, and talking about why it is important to maintain USFK in Korea. Now, currently, there are about 28,500 American troops that are stationed in South Korea. And there are only two other countries in the world that have more American troops stationed in them, and they are Germany and Japan. Germany has about 38,000 American troops, and Japan has about 52,000 American troops. So what are the benefits of maintaining American forces in Korea? We have to look at this from both the American and the South Korean points of view. Before I talk about the South Korean points of view, which I'm more familiar with, I will talk about it from the American perspective first. The first reason that it is important for the US to maintain troop levels in South Korea is that we have to remember that North Korea is not the only threat in the region. It is no secret that the People's Republic of China is actively trying to replace the United States as the main Pacific power. If the US withdraws troops from South Korea, which it has been allied with for almost 70 years, that would send a signal to Beijing and to Moscow that the United States might not be willing to protect its interests in the Pacific region. Not only will this jeopardize American interests in the East Asian region, it would also cause a lot of problems for the US in the South China Sea, and to complicate matters, it would also not serve America's interest in maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific. The second reason as to why the United States should maintain troop levels in South Korea is not so much strategic, but rather to do with logistics. If the United States decided to withdraw 28,500 American troops from South Korea, it wouldn't just be those numbers of troops. It would also be thousands of their family members and dependents. It would also be a lot of tanks, a lot of military assets that they would have to move. They would have to be moved to Japan, or perhaps to Hawaii, or Guam, or perhaps even to the continental US. It would be an expensive tactical move. This is a huge logistical nightmare that will take years to accomplish. Furthermore, we also have to take into consideration that while the US taxpayers might say that it is unfair that South Korea is not paying, quote-unquote, its fair share of defense cost sharing, we also have to remember that South Korea does pay for USFK troops to be maintained in South Korea. But if they were moved out of South Korea and moved to anywhere in the US territories or even in any of the US states, then American taxpayers would be paying for all of those troops. And those troops would either have to be completely funded by American taxpayers, or those American troops would have to be let go. And so even from a purely accounting perspective, it makes sense for the United States to maintain troop levels in South Korea as opposed to withdrawing them. The third reason as to why the US should maintain US troop levels in South Korea is actually counterintuitive. People think that withdrawing American troops would actually lead to peace, but I disagree. I believe that withdrawing American troops would actually lead to a war. And the reason for that is that we have to take into consideration the role that American troops have played in South Korea over the past few decades. As insulting as this comparison may be, we have to take into consideration that the thousands of American troops that have been stationed in Korea over the years have served as a tripwire, meaning that if the North Koreans ever attacked South Korea, the fact that it would automatically involve American troops would mean that the North Koreans would be going to war against the United States. So why would the removal of these troops lead to a war? That's because we have to consider the North Korean perspective. From the North Korean point of view, if a war broke out and the American troops were stationed in South Korea, there would be a lot of casualties even among American soldiers. And the Americans know this, and the North Koreans knows this, everyone knows that this will happen. But if the United States withdrew those forces from Korea, from the North Korean perspective, They would think that that's because the Americans are preparing for a war. They're preparing for a preemptive strike, and they're trying to make sure that they are going to minimize American casualties. The withdrawal of thousands of American soldiers and their families would spook the North Koreans. They would think that the United States is planning a preemptive strike in North Korea, which would convince a lot of hawks in North Korea to lead a preemptive strike of their own. It could lead to a catastrophic war. Before Donald Trump met with Kim Jong-un, he supposedly issued an order to the Pentagon to begin the withdrawal process of American troops and their families from Korea. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed and they did not listen to that order. The US-South Korea military alliance has been one of America's crowning foreign policy achievements. It has helped to maintain peace in East Asia for over 70 years. It would be insane to get rid of that successful policy now. Now, as for the benefits that South Korea enjoys, there's quite a bit of overlap with the United States. Obviously, America would prefer for there to be peace in East Asia. But I guarantee you, South Korea would prefer it a lot more. If a war broke out, it would affect South Korea a lot more than it would affect the United States. So aside from the benefits that I've already mentioned, what other benefits does South Korea have to gain from having so many American troops stationed in South Korea? The first one is economic. North Korea frequently threatens South Korea with complete destruction. One of the favorite phrases is to turn South Korea into a sea of fire. Now, normally, when a country threatens another country to turn into a sea of fire, that tends to make markets a bit jittery. For example, if China one day said that they were going to turn America into rubble, that would cause a lot of people to be concerned and it would tank stock markets. But even when North Korea says something like that very similarly and very frequently, it doesn't completely ruin South Korea's economy. Now, why is that? And that's because, as I said earlier, the presence of American troops have continued to serve as a security guarantee for South Korea. If the North Koreans ever went through with any of their threats and actually decided to go to war against South Korea and to turn us into a sea of fire, it would automatically mean that they would be going to war against the United States. And that is a war that the North Koreans would never be able to win. And that is why international markets and financiers know that North Korea's threats are mostly hollow. So while North Korea's threats do lead to some market dips here and there, it never leads to a complete economic collapse in South Korea. It is this security guarantee that has allowed South Korea's economy to develop to the extent that South Korea is now a member of the OECD and also a member of the G20. And the fact that South Korea's economy has grown large enough for it to be afforded that kind of status is a direct result of the USFKH forces that have been deployed in South Korea for all of these years. And although I mentioned this earlier, and I'm at the risk of repeating myself, North Korea is not the only threat in the region. South Korea is also right to be concerned about China's rise. From THAAD to fishing fleets to violations of Korea's airspace, China is a force to be reckoned with. Now, over the years, there have been many voices in both America and in South Korea that have called for the withdrawal of American forces from South Korea. Now, although I personally disagree, on some level, I can still understand why some Americans would want the US troops stationed in South Korea to be sent back home. But it's a little harder to understand why some South Koreans would want American troops to be withdrawn. And that's because, as I said earlier, we also have to contend with China. Now, if American troops are withdrawn, can South Korea protect itself and stand up to Chinese forces? I'm not sure that it can. And until that day comes, if it ever comes, I highly doubt that it would be in South Korea's interest to have American forces in this country to be withdrawn. This alliance between the United States and South Korea has not exactly been smooth sailing, but whatever is. But no matter how difficult things have been sometimes, I believe that it would be reckless to suddenly withdraw American troops from South Korea. Over the past 4 years, the alliance between the United States and South Korea has seen some better days. And a lot of it is due to these stalled cost negotiation talks. But regardless of who wins the elections in November, these talks will continue, and hopefully these talks will continue in a more reasonable and mature fashion, and that this alliance will continue on for another 70 years. Alright, so that brings us to the end of this video. If you like this video, don't forget to click on the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell, and if you have a comment, leave it down below. My name is John Lee, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.